What's up, everybody? I am your host, an FBI agent determined to catch that sadistic son of a bitch, and that is my co-host, a psychotic theatrical serial killer who is way too smart for me. And welcome to the Grindhouse Syndicate, where today we cover a truly bone-chilling found footage film, and was at one point kind of a mysterious underground legend for a while. So today we are talking about John Dowdle's The Poughkeepsie Tapes from 2007. And this was requested by Carly Prinsloo and backed up by my co-host here, Jordan. You really wanted to do this movie. Carly Prinsloo wanted us to do this movie, and I honestly put this off for some time.
Yeah, I think since she requested that, I brought this up every month, except October. October's kind of already laid out, but yeah, I think at least once a month that this has been brought up.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be difficult to write. Like, I honestly, I straight up had no idea how I was going to write the plot of a documentary, because this is, even though it's like considered found footage, it's really like a true crime documentary.
It's a mockumentary.
Yeah, and I was like, how am I going to fucking write a documentary in story form? So this was for sure the hardest episode I had ever written.
Well, you pulled it off, I hope.
Well, you hope. Yeah, you haven't heard yet. Yeah, and another thing with this movie is like, I think I might have mentioned it before, but I spent a brief time in college for criminology. It's always been a real big interest for, I believe, both of us. And, I learned in that a lot of these like really heavy cases, especially like kids, when kids are involved, really suck to like carry around. Like they really bring you down, which is one of the many reasons I chose not to do that career path. But this movie really reminds me of that.
Oh God, yes, this movie, especially having kids, man, I think that's one of the true horrors behind this movie, and what makes it so scary is these are, a lot of, we get like the Nightmare on Elm Street, but nobody's getting killed in their dreams.
Those are fun.
Except that one kid that inspired that movie. But those things don't happen in real life. Like, you don't have a unkillable guy with a hockey mask coming out and trying to kill you at camp. But this shit happens. Like, this happens, and it happens a lot.
Yeah, even though this movie's killer isn't real, a lot of the stuff that he does is real.
Yeah, some of it's based off of actual real stories, too. At least, I don't know if they were written that way, but I know that there is very close comparisons from a couple different killers.
Yeah, I actually bring a couple of these up in the episode. I don't go into a ton of detail. If you are interested in it, you can take that information and go look it up. But yeah, there is a lot of stuff in this that is based off of some real situations, real victims, real killers.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff didn't bother me as much when I was younger, but, getting older and having kids, man, there's specifically in this movie, it really at one point shows how easy and how quick something like this can happen, and knowing that it does happen is the real horror behind this movie.
I believe that around the same time I started going to school for this, you were having your first kid. And oddly enough, that kind of changed my outlook on what I would look into, what I would learn about. And this movie, I didn't realize it until I wrote it, but this movie is nothing but like nonstop pain, torture, murder, and just like evil. That's this whole entire movie. There's really no downtime in this movie at all. And as I was writing it, I was like, good God, all I'm doing is writing like just fucking mayhem and terrible shit. That's all this whole entire episode is.
I think they do a really good job, though, at presenting this in a really realistic fashion.
Oh, yeah.
The found footage parts of this movie are great.
Well, I will say that I dug up everything I could on this. There's not a lot on this movie, but I did dig up what I could find. So, we'll kind of, I think we'll be able to give you the most like in-depth information about this. So with that being said, let's jump into the Poughkeepsie Tapes.
Hello, boys and ghouls. If you want to stay up to date on what's going on with the show, talk about or submit your movie requests, or just say die, then I got good news for you. You can always find us at one of our social media accounts or our official website at Grindhouse.Horror.Pod.com, Facecrook at the Grindhouse Syndicate Horror Podcast, Instascam at grindhousesyndicate.horror.pod, and many gore, which you can always find links for in the show notes as always. And you know what I always say, the morgue, the merrier. So please subscribe or follow for alerts on new episodes. Now, back to the show, kiddies. Frights, camera, action.
And if you really love us and don't want us to become a true crime podcast, give us a review.
For the YouTube people out there, please comment. YouTube is going to hate this episode.
Oh, God,
I can tell you right now, like when I was watching this, YouTube is going to stomp this out as much as possible.
When I was writing it, I knew YouTube's going to do everything they can to suppress this episode because this is going to be a very graphic episode.
Yeah, so any comments and likes definitely will help us get this out to as many people as possible because YouTube is going to try to prevent that.
All right, so the Poughkeepsie Tapes is a 2007 American mockumentary horror film written, directed, and edited by John Dowdle from a story he co-wrote with his brother Drew Dowdle. It revolves around a serial killer's murders in Poughkeepsie, New York, told through the interviews and found footage from the killer's collection of snuff films. The film premiered at the 2007 Tribeca Film Festival, but had a troubled release history. It was originally slated for theatrical release by MGM in February of 2008, but was suddenly removed from the release schedule. The film had a brief VOD release in 2014, but remained unavailable on home media. In October of 2017, the film was released and remastered on DVD and Blu-ray by Shout Factory via the newly revived Orion Pictures. That's really the gist of kind of what you can look up. Now, I got some more, but this was stuff I had to really dig for this one. So, how this came to be was John Dowdle went to film school and his brother went to business school with plans to work together as director and producer once they had both graduated. They had previously worked together on a small independent comedy that it did okay at film festivals, but it never got picked up and distributed. So their second project would be a horror film. They were both kind of big horror fans growing up, and they decided that, I think they were saying something like, horror fans are a lot more accepting of different ideas, and you can kind of go crazier with horror. I remember even Wes Craven saying that. It's like, you can do whatever you want as long as you put like 5 to 7 kills in it, and horror fans they'll probably like it.
Yeah, the horror fans are very dedicated. I think horror has a much better chance of having a low budget movie or an independent movie that ends up blowing up or even over time gaining a cult following, whereas like a low budget independent comedy movie is never going to be a massive movie with merchandise and stuff.
Yeah. So they're going to do this horror film, but they didn't have much money. So they decided to use found footage, interviews with actors, and hire friends and family to work on the film. The interviews were shot on actual film and took only 2 days to complete, while the rest of the movie was shot using an actual handheld video camera and filmed by actor Ben Mesmar, who plays serial killer Edward Carver. and this was done to give the movie more realism. Basically gave this guy who didn't know shit about filming this camera and said, here, film these scenes. And I do think that helped the movie. Many different local actresses auditioned for the role of kidnapped victim Cheryl Dempsey, but during the casting process, director John Dowdle, his new wife, Stacy Chbosky, really wanted the part. And she had also helped develop the story while John wrote it during their engagement. I believe he was like finishing up the writing on their honeymoon. I just want to point out, Stacy Chbosky is fucking awesome. I've seen some interviews with her about this, and she loved this. Like, she loved filming it. She loves all the part that she played in it.
She is the Sherry Moon who can act. I think that this movie the success was predicated around her being that character having somebody really good acting, and I thought she killed it, man.
Yeah, she did. And what's interesting is originally the story that they wrote didn't have the Cheryl Dempsey character, and she was kind of helping here and there. And she said, well, one of the things you're missing is you don't really have a character that you can follow, because, we already know that this doesn't really have like a plot like a normal story would. You're just kind of following the crimes of this killer. And she was the one that was like, you need to put somebody in there that we can follow and root for. And that is how the character came along. And then after basically trying out so many different actresses, she was like, just let me do it. Like, I'll do it. And she really wanted to go all out and do this crazy shit that she does in this movie. And just seeing her talk about it's awesome, because she had so much fun. And she adds so much to this movie.
Yeah, I think for somebody who didn't have experience, I thought there's not many things that I can see, or anything that I've seen in this movie from her, that I'm like, she could have did that better. I think she was all out on everything, and I think you can feel it in the movie.
So once they finished the film, it premiered at Tribeca Film Festival, and it did fantastic. Even to the point where they had to show extra screenings because it was requested so much. So the brothers were immediately approached by MGM to distribute the film, and also signed them to write and direct the up-and-coming found footage remake of Spanish film Rec, retitled Quarantine. Now, everything seems to be going great for the film and the two brothers who made it, but here's where things kind of go down. So, when the brothers signed their deal with MGM, they were placed under a type of gag order from talking about the movie. So, while they began work on Quarantine, the movie goes to a second film festival, where the presenters introduced the film as a real documentary about a real serial killer. The audience and critics got pissed over this, basically claiming that these brothers were trying to lie their way into success. And unfortunately, the brothers were under this gag order and could not come out and publicly say like they were very much against this publicity stunt. And at the time, the film was owned by MGM, so they didn't even have any control over it anymore. So MGM realizes that this backlash could be much worse with a national audience, so a month before the film's theatrical release, they pull it. Now, this is 2007. In 2014, they briefly released it on DirecTV's video on demand service, but that only lasted for a month. So the film wasn't fully released until 2017, 10 years later. But because of all that, the mystery surrounding why it was pulled from theaters last minute caused the underground horror community to illegally download and distribute copies of the film and pass them around websites and conventions, cementing it as an underground cult classic and a must-have for hardcore physical media horror collectors.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you create a legend around a movie. I think it's crazy that they pulled it for that. I mean, it was 8 years prior. The Blair Witch did the same thing, and They were highly successful and praised for it.
Well, they talked about that. I actually seen the two brothers talk about that. And I think that what they were saying, and I agree with them, is the difference was, you have a group of filmmakers that's trying to make this witch story like real. Here, we're talking about an actual serial killer with actual victims that you're trying, and it is different in that sense.
Well, and I'll talk about this more at the end, but the way they end this movie, I think if this movie came out in the 90s, late 90s, that time where the internet was just beginning, I think that this could have been massively successful as a release. I don't know how many people would have seen it as distasteful, obviously trying to push this as a real story, but I think the people coming out of the theater thinking that this guy could be anywhere, could be in their hometown.
It's scary, yeah.
It's really a scary, scary thing to think about.
That's kind of what Blair Witch did for the woods.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I was told the Blair Witch lived behind our house in the woods, and I believed that for a long time. So, having people come out of the theaters with that thought, and they really, in this movie, really good when they're talking about that, and they even say, he could be anywhere. He may be killing, he may not, but if this thing ever does hit theaters, he's not going to be able to help himself, which is the perfect ending for people if that think it's real. So I think it could have had some really, really good success.
I think, though, it does help the movie out that it was like this thing, man, that you would go to a convention and someone would give you this like blank DVD and you put it in, you have no idea what it is, and it's extremely convincing. And it leaves you feeling like, oh fuck, like it like an elevator just drops out, from under you.
Well, I think it left a lot of those people who were getting these bootleg copies thinking even more so that it was real.
Oh, a lot of people thought it was real because there was no information to hardly look up on it. I mean, almost nobody in the film is like a legitimate actor. They're, some of them are actors, but they're more like local actors. A lot of people are like friends and family or relatives.
Yeah, you feel like you're getting this underground snuff film that was, with not knowing any information, it was obviously pulled because it was too close to a snuff film to be put out in theaters. And the legend behind that, I'm sure, just went out of control.
Well, for 10 years, the reason, the kind of reason that went around with everyone, the reason that it had been pulled was because it was too scary. And that was what followed that movie around for a long time. And then, we finally get like a more wide release and people start kind of putting things together and figuring it out. But yeah, man, for 10 years, that followed that movie around as this underground thing that you got from somebody you knew, or you just bought it from somebody and had really no information on it. And it's so convincing.
I've seen this movie on a lot of people's top scariest, like actually scary horror movies too. And I think it goes back to the realism and how good they did that found footage. Where if you didn't know in that time period, if you got a hold of this movie and you weren't sure if it was real or not, the found footage is good enough to be horrifying.
Yeah, I think it's even more terrifying to people that are familiar with serial killers and crimes and stuff like that are really know that a lot of this stuff happens. I think your average person could watch this and, can think some of this stuff happens or it's really rare that it happens. But other people that are really plugged into what really goes on with crime knows that this is stuff that happens more frequently than people would want to get let out.
Yeah, I mean, they say ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
So for those who aren't familiar, I could see it not being that's that bad of a movie. But yeah, this stuff happens all the time.
All right, so ratings. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 50%. It did not get the independent film bump. not this time.
Took too long for it to come out. It lost its bump.
IMDb gave it a 5.9 out of 10. Letterboxd gave it a sad 2.6 out of 5. But the Google average audience rating is a 3.8 out of 5.
Yeah,
Seems
I
more,
think that
yeah,
speaks volumes
yeah.
to the people who were looking out for this movie to specifically watch it. They're horror fans.
If you would like to watch this movie, you can currently find it streaming on Tubi, Roku, and MGM Plus. All right, so are you ready to jump into the horrendous plot of this movie?
Yes, yes, I am.
The-
It's been a while. I've been
yeah.
ready for this.
So we start out with the scenes of a funeral intertwined with home movie footage of a young girl. And this girl's name is Cheryl Dempsey. And this is her funeral. Now, by the time we get to her funeral here, she's an adult and she's pretty much the closest thing to a main character we have in this. So we then kind of jump back and forth between a family very obviously grieving while saying their final goodbyes and a much younger, happier teenage Cheryl before her life was destroyed by this serial killer. We then cut to FBI profiler Felton Lewis as he tells us that the story of what happened to Cheryl Dempsey and what she became is truly one of the strangest, most disturbing things he has ever come across in the history of serial murder. We then cut to some camcorder footage being filmed by an unknown man later that night who has dug up Cheryl's grave, broken into her coffin, attached a strap to her body, and pulls her from her grave with his car. We then get an overhead shot of the city of Poughkeepsie, New York, as we see the title card appear on screen, the Poughkeepsie Tapes. Which, by the way, how they got this shot was they didn't have any money, so they paid a helicopter pilot $100 to take them up and just fly them over Poughkeepsie. And they had him take the doors of the helicopter off, and they just hung out the side of the helicopter with just holding the camera. This is what. So if you go back and watch it, you can actually slightly see the camera kind of moving, like vibrating from the helicopter blades. Yeah, that's how they managed to pull this off.
I thought for sure it was drones, but I guess thinking back 2007, drones they were a thing, but they weren't
expensive.
They weren't, as frequent. Sad when you can pay a guy with a helicopter and it'd
Yeah.
be cheaper than going and
Yeah.
buying a drone.
So after this intro, the screen goes black, and we begin part 1, the tapes. So we see the house that the tapes were found in, and we jump over to FBI field agent Leonard Schway, who we are going to hear from a lot in this movie. And he tells us that before they found the tapes, they thought all of these killings were the works of many different people and aren't connected at all. But once they got the tapes, they were shocked to find that this was all just one crazy ass dude. We then cut to FBI audio and visual specialist Simon Alray, who got tasked with the horrendous job of watching and logging all 2,400 hours of the Poughkeepsie tapes, to which he describes as so bad that he could only sleep 1 to 2 hours a night because of nightmares he would have. I would not want to have to watch all of those fucking tapes.
Yeah, this would be a fucking awful job.
And take a very long time.
Yeah, I don't. Does he say how long it took him?
No.
I mean, I feel like just 8 hours a day. I didn't do the math on that, but it'd take a long fucking time.
Yeah, and he's got to log them, so I'm sure he's got to write down kind of at least a gist of what's on each tape.
Yeah, the shot where he shows like the amount of tapes that was recovered is fucking insane.
We then cut to another FBI field agent, Pam Frears, as she stands in the backyard of the house where the tapes were found and begins explaining the locations of all the bodies that they found. We can see that the FBI essentially had to dig up the whole backyard, and she explains that we have many different types of victims here, including a couple and their 10-month-old baby. So we're getting pretty dark pretty fast. Simon Alray then shows us the tapes all lined up in the FBI evidence building, and holy fucking shit, there's a lot of them. There's probably like 2,000 VHS tapes here.
Yeah, that would be a fucking headache. I'd be going for a transfer.
Yeah, it's a lot, and he shows us the tapes that are like Cheryl Dempsey, which is 70% of them.
Yeah, you would think in real life that this would probably take like 10 different people
Yeah.
logging these and talking back and forth about, trying to connect dots. There's no way one person could literally go through all this without it taking them years.
Yeah, it's a lot. So we then jump back to Leonard Shui, who informs us that according to FBI statistics, at any given time, there are somewhere between 25 and 50 active serial killers in America alone, which I believe is true. We then find out that the first 100 hours or so of the tapes are these weird videos of sex workers getting down into their underwear and trying to pop these big ass balloons.
This is a weird balloon fetish.
This is very weird. I don't see how it could turn you on at all. But, people got their weird things, man.
I think it might be a real fetish.
Yeah. I do know that some years ago, someone showed me cake fart porn videos, and I was like, how did you find this?
A what?
Cake fart is literally girls farting on a cake, like a birthday cake.
That's fucking weird.
It is
That's
weird.
too specific to be a fetish. That's like
weird.
There's like gotta be 3 people in the world who's into that. Like,
It-
why not a pie?
Hey, if you want to look up cake farts, go ahead. I swear it's real.
Well, then I definitely believe that the balloon,
Yeah, I'm
the
sure it is.
prostitutes sitting on balloons and popping them is a thing.
So now that we got a little bit of background on the tapes and the people who investigated them, it is time to move on to part 2, First Blood. And we immediately get introduced to Mike Mokes, who is a retired FBI profiler who is now a professor who teaches at the FBI National Academy. And we are going to hear from him a lot as he reviews this case with a class full of students. This next part, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about because I personally hate crimes involving children, but I'll give you pretty much the gist of it. So we see this tape of our killer, who is the FBI has named Edward Carver, and he is driving in his car filming when all of a sudden he passes by a house that has a little girl playing by herself in the front yard. He then backs up, gets out of his car, and walks over to the girl and begins talking to her. Now, this little girl knows something is wrong here and is doing everything she can to not really engage with this shit stain of a human. Once he realizes that the whole nice guy routine isn't going to work with this little girl, he bashes her in the head, knocking her unconscious, picks her up and runs to his car and drives off. Now, unfortunately, we find out from a police officer that sometime later, the body of this 8-year-old girl was found in a cornfield, very dead. We also hear the mother's 911 call where she reports her daughter missing, telling the police that someone took her and there is blood in the front yard. The 911 operator then says that she must wait 24 hours to make the report, which I have said on this show before is 100% not true. In any state in the United States, this is not a fucking law, especially with children.
Yeah, not with an 8-year-old.
No.
Yeah, that would be absolutely awful. I think this whole thing is one of the scariest parts of the movies or the movie for me. Just showing
how easy it is.
The kid did everything that you're supposed to do, which is not talk to strangers. She tries to not engage with him, and just showing how easy and how fast. Like, we don't get any cuts in this whole scene. This is apparently his first victim. They say, they think he just snapped one day and went riding around and looking for the first victim he could take advantage of. And we don't get any cuts. So we see this whole thing in real time. It takes all of about a minute and a half.
Yeah.
And she's knocked out in the car, and it's just fucking horrifying that we know that this very thing has happened tens of thousands of times.
Yeah, if I remember right, there are over 600,000 people reported missing in the US alone. I'm pretty sure that it's I'm pretty sure it's around 600,000. And a lot of those cases are children, unfortunately. It is a terrible thing that we have to worry about happening, but it is the reality that it can be this easy.
Yeah, and they talk about, after when they find her body, there is some sexual stuff involved in that too, which just makes it
So much worse.
even way more awful.
So once the video ends, Mike then looks at the class and says, "This is nothing. He doesn't even know what he's doing yet," which is fucking chilling.
This guy teaching this class, and I'm sure there's people like this, he seems to be like one of those guys who's like almost enjoys when he gets students in there and being like, "Oh, you wait, you think you can handle this, you wait and you see how bad it gets." Like, he just seems to almost like enjoy seeing the reactions of these people and see who's going to make it. And I get that they're showing them this to see, for people to decide if they want this as a career path or not. But he seems to enjoy it a little bit too much.
So we then immediately jump right into another one of Carver's tapes where we see him, air quotes, broke down on the side of the road when a car stops and asks if he is having car trouble. He walks over to the car where we see a man and a woman, and he tells them that, yeah, this car's like a piece of shit, and he asks for a ride to a gas station, to which they say, sure, hop in. So he gets in the back seat, and he asks if they mind if he records this because he's making a little documentary about his trip. And they agree. They say that's fine. They introduce themselves as Frank and Jeanette, and Carver tells them that his name is Ed. So this is where we get the FBI name Edward Carver. In a bit after some small talk, he tells them to turn off of the freeway and drive down to a small gas station a mile or so down the road. Once they reach the station, which we find out was abandoned, Carver hits Frank over the head with a metal pipe, causing him to wreck the car. We then hear Jeanette start screaming as the camera is like getting swung all over the car. Carver then places a chloroform rag over Jeanette's face and films as she slowly loses consciousness.
What was it, a pipe? I thought it was a hammer. I thought he shows a
hammer.
hammer in between his legs, which is, I mean, I know it doesn't make much of a difference, but I don't know. There's just something about a hammer that's.
I mean, it
even
could have been.
terrifying.
I thought it was a pipe, but it was hard for me. Your TV looks better than mine.
Yeah, it is hard to see. He does briefly show it like right before he makes the attack. But yeah, and the fact that he has the wherewithal to turn the camera around and get her face as he's drugging her and still avoid getting his face in the shot shows that this guy really gets off on the fear that he's getting from the people that he's doing this to.
He's also like practicing this stuff because to really get that down on your first try with someone who's struggling, it's very difficult. We also find out from our FBI friends that this is the first planned out murder Carver has done. So Mike then cuts the tape back on, and we see Jeanette being held in a basement with Carver trying to wake her up to show her something horrifying. We then quickly cut to a news segment where a reporter announces that the hunt for the missing couple has come to an end after being found dead. We then jump to a forensic pathologist that explains that the police brought in a woman's body that was badly decomposed, missing her head and hands, but this was no normal body. This woman had her stomach and intestines removed and a human head put in their place. But it wasn't her head. It was the head of her husband, Frank. And you see this. They show this briefly in the movie.
Too.
And it's like, it's just chilling. It's chilling to think that this guy is just getting into killing, as far as we could tell. And he's going this hard immediately.
Yeah. So we're about to get into it in a minute, but they talk about some of the things he did in this planning process too, which shows that from the very beginning, he was 10 steps ahead of anybody else.
So the FBI finds out the couple's route back home, and they check the surveillance footage from every gas station along the way, and they manage to find the footage of our killer. Unfortunately, though, he knew that the camera was there, and he covered his face as he pumped the gas. And as he's waiting for the car to fill up, he looks at the camera and using sign language says the Red House. Turns out the Red House is the Red House Tavern, which was only 3 miles away from the gas station. And this is where the cops find Frank's body. And what makes this strange is the fact that Carver spelled this message out on the surveillance camera before he even met Frank and Jeanette. So he had everything planned out before he even found his victims.
That's chilling.
Yeah.
And that's like I said, a level of intelligence and being ahead of everybody else to make that sign before you even met the people that you were going to go after. That's just crazy.
We then jump on over to Pam Frears, one of our FBI field agents, and she tells us about an 18-year-old girl who was kidnapped and murdered by Carver. But this girl lived 100 miles from Carver's house. He then removed her head and hands with a saw, dumped her torso in southern New York and her head and hands in western New York, hours away. So he effectively made this murder very difficult to solve because he knows that local police are not so great at sharing information, which is true a lot of the time. A real life example of stuff like this, and in my opinion, the most scariest serial killer ever, is a man named Israel Keys. He did stuff like this to where if he would have just stayed doing what he was doing, I don't think he ever would have been caught.
Yeah.
Like Israel Keys, the FBI doesn't release a lot of information about Israel Keys because his plans were so good. They don't really want it to inspire other people. But you can look into Israel Keys, and he is similar to this guy, and he's fucking scary. I mean, it's just and you would never know it. Like seeing him, his best friends, his girlfriend, his daughter, no fucking idea he ever did shit like this.
Well, when I was watching this, I actually thought of him as being the best comparison
Yeah, he is.
throughout this. And I think a big part of that is one thing he did that kept himself from being caught is he knew that the FBI and homicide detectives would profile people based on the victims that you go after and how you kill them. So he made it a point to constantly to never leave a pattern. That way these things wouldn't be put together. And that is something that is prevalent throughout this movie.
Yeah, man, like Israel Keys would, get a plane ticket, fly like 5 states away, rent a car, drive like 3 states away, find a random house, kill people with like weapons that he had hid there years before in the woods, and then literally just, go back a complete different way, fly from another state back home. It was almost impossible to track, to ever prove he was in that area at the time.
Yeah, if I remember right, too, he didn't have one like particular set of victims.
He didn't.
Either. Like you have certain killers. I think the most common is people killing prostitutes because they don't have as many family members, and a lot of them are on the streets and whatnot. Harder to track. The police don't take those as serious, unfortunately. Some people go after kids. Some people go after younger women. Some people go after men. But when you have killers like this that just don't care.
Yeah, he did it all.
They don't leave a pattern.
So now that we have moved into the evolution of Edward Carver's killing, it is now time to jump into the meat and potatoes of this story. Part 4, Cheryl Dempsey. So we start off by seeing Carver's surveillance footage that he shot from his car of Cheryl as she attends college. He then follows her home where he uses a device to listen into her phone calls. So he has now graduated to being fixated on his victims and putting a lot more time and effort into this than he has previously. Now, while Cheryl attends college, she's still living at home with her parents, and this is where Carver has tracked her to. And while listening to her phone call with her boyfriend, Carver learns that her parents are going out of town for a week and it will just be her at the house. So, sometime later that week, we see Carver sneak in through the back door where he finds Cheryl and her boyfriend are the only ones home. He grabs a butcher knife from the kitchen and heads upstairs. Once he gets up there, he finds that Cheryl is in the shower and he accidentally alerts her that he is in the room when he attempts to pick up a pair of her underwear, bumping the dresser. But unfortunately, Cheryl doesn't think it's an intruder. She just thinks it's her boyfriend, Tim, kind of fucking with her. So he then walks over to the shower and he is standing right next to Cheryl when suddenly her boyfriend almost walks into the room, but he doesn't quite walk in far enough to see Carver standing there. After that close call, Carver then sets the camera up on a shelf in the room and hides in the closet. Cheryl then gets out of the shower where her boyfriend Tim comes in and begins talking to her. They kind of flirt around for a little bit and even kiss, with Carver standing just mere feet from them, watching them from the closet. They then agree to watch a movie and head downstairs. This whole scene is super suspenseful.
Yeah, very, very unnerving. This is, so for one, when he's listening to her phone call, I thought it was really interesting that she foreshadows what's about to happen.
Mhm.
She actually tells her boyfriend on the phone that she feels like she's being watched. She's like, I just have a bad feeling, kind of feel like I'm being watched. This is the first shot of him in his like plague doctor mask
yeah.
that we actually get to see. Him standing behind her in the closet. She is literally like 2 feet away, and the camera angle is she's blocking the little crack in the door that he's standing in. So it's just super suspenseful. Two things I did catch that I thought was kind of cool. The POV is very Halloween-like,
Yeah.
with him going through the house before he puts the camera down. And I also thought that before he goes upstairs, there's a shadow on the wall, and then we get it again about to come up, but it was very Nosferatu.
Huh. I didn't
Because
catch
he
that.
even has that like kind of pointy nose and
Mhm.
the plague doctor and with the mask. It's almost like they set it up to kind of be an ode to that scene, that famous scene of Nosferatu heading up the stairs.
We then fast forward a couple hours where we see Carver finally emerge from the closet, grab his camera, and head downstairs. When he gets down there, we see that most of the lights are off and Cheryl and Tim are asleep on the couch. Carver then walks over to them, filming very close to their faces. Cheryl then wakes up, but she doesn't see Carver because he's like standing behind the couch and he kind of like ducks down and hides for a moment. Cheryl then wakes Tim up and says they should go to bed, which he agrees. Cheryl then heads to the bathroom while Tim walks into the dark kitchen. Carver then quietly follows him in there where he stabs Tim multiple times. Cheryl hears this and comes like running out of the bathroom where she is shocked at seeing this strange man in her house. She then takes off running but is quickly caught by Carver, who then begins to violently punch her in the head until she is unconscious. He then heads back into the kitchen, stands over Tim's body, and stomps his head. We then cut to a news report about the home invasion where the reporter says that Cheryl's parents returned home from their trip where they found a very dead and decomposed Tim and their daughter Cheryl was missing. It's funny that you had said that a minute ago because I'd put in my notes here that I wanted to point it out. So Carver drives around in an old, ugly brown station wagon, and he's following this young female student all over town.
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit like when Michael Myers follows Lori around in his brown station wagon.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to mention that. You know, we just recently covered Halloween, and for those with a keen eye will notice that Michael Myers in almost every scene of that movie, somewhere in the background, that station wagon is sitting there where he is stalking them early
Yeah.
in the movie. And I think that their decision to use the station wagon was not coincidental. I think it was done on purpose.
Could be.
And I also want to bring up. So when Tim gets killed, I thought when the lights flip on, that awesome reflection we get of him, thought that was a great touch to add in there. Also, when we get the shadow view of him beating her, which was done very good. They did that, like, it's super brutal. But one thing, like the old cameras, when they would pick up loud noises, it would almost the sound would cut out for a second.
Yeah.
And they do I thought it was really a good attention to detail of them, like every time he would hit her, it would be so loud the camera's sound would just kind of cut out for a second.
Well, they're using a real handheld camcorder for this. And the reason that they actually got Ben Mesmer to play Carver was because he is such an energetic theatrical actor. And I think that he adds to these crazy fucking scenes, because you wouldn't be able to pass this movie off as wild as it is without a guy like that.
No, he does a phenomenal job at playing a awful shit-stained piece of shit killer.
So after that, we then jump back to Carver's tapes, where we see a freshly kidnapped Cheryl Dempsey hog-tied on the table. And this looks absolutely horrible. I would never want to be tied up like this.
Yeah, this is like BDSM tied, and you don't, like, it's clear he's either he has some history and some BDSM, or he's done some practice, because you're not gonna nail this, like, tie up like this. It just out of your mind. That was one interesting thing. I thought that the way he ties them up in this movie that was never brought up by the FBI is looking into like the local BDSM community or something, because he's very much into making her his slave, and he's the master, and the way he hog ties her and ties her up different parts of this movie. It's very, very, very scary. It's very, very scary that when that camera first flips on and she's tied up, like pretty much hog tied, I was like, God damn, this is just about to get serious.
Well, Stacy Chbosky, she actually would practice tying herself up like this, because she wanted that when she did the shot, she wanted it to be like so legitimate that she would actually practice this, which was funny. She tells a story where her brother-in-law, who's the producer of this movie, actually walks in to ask her something, and she's done tied herself up like this, and he just nopes right the fuck out of there. He's like, whatever you're doing. I don't know.
Impressive to be able to tie yourself up like this.
So Cheryl's freaking out here, and Carver, who is now dressed in a plague doctor mask and a fucking cape, leans down next to her and begins to kind of mimic her. He then starts screaming at her and even asking her name. And when she answers Cheryl, he screams wrong, punches her in the face, and tells her name is now Slave. We then skip over to an interview with a cop who arrived at the Dempsey house after Tim's body was discovered. And he tells us that Tim's murder had been so brutal that they had little hope of finding Cheryl alive. He then goes on to describe what they found upon entering the house, and he says that Tim's left side of his face had been crushed in, he had been cut from his anus to his throat, his intestines had been pulled out and used to decorate the house like Christmas lights, and his genitals had been removed and placed in a drawer upstairs.
The sock drawer, not the underwear drawer. Why would you not put the genitals in the underwear drawer?
I don't know.
Seems like a mess.
When I heard this, though, I was like, this is some Terrifier shit.
This is, and the difference is we celebrate Terrifier.
Yeah.
Like we do, and it's because it is a character that
a fun character.
Yeah, it's an unrealistic character. Whereas somebody like this, it's so real that it's a completely different feel. Like we don't celebrate this. It's almost like holy shit.
So we then cut to another tape where we see Cheryl being held in a basement with her arms chained to the ceiling. She's crying and freaking out, and she says that she wants her mom. This sets Carver off, and he tells her that he killed her mom and her whole family, which is a total lie, but he uses this to mentally torture Cheryl more. He then demands her to tell him that she is happy that he murdered her whole family, which of course she refuses. This angers Carver to a great extent, to the point where he unchains her, drags her over to a sink, and forces her head underwater until she says it. And this scene was 100% legit. They really did this to Stacy Chbosky, who totally loved it and had a blast doing it.
She may be into some
She
BDSM,
might
man.
be.
She might be. I think this is some of her best acting, I guess you would call it. And this whole scene it's very legitimate.
Yeah, she said that, she's like, we were broke. We couldn't afford stunt people, so it had to be me. And she was like, they were talking about how they were going to do it. And she's like, just put my head underwater.
And he's like, honey, we have a stunt person we've already hired. And she's like, no, it's got to be me.
Well, it's funny because, like, the director, her husband, and they had just gotten married. He's over there. He's like, I'm over there, like, crying, getting upset, like, watching this happen to my new wife and thinking, like, she's going to think, like, I'm insane. And she's over there just having a blast. And it's just a weird dynamic.
Yeah, having a blast, being forced into sexual slavery and getting waterboarded and drowned and beat. Yeah, she's got a bit of kink to her.
So after that, we then get a quick cut to Carver walking up to Cheryl's house just days after the kidnapping and murder, where he sees her mom standing outside. He walks up to her, where he tells her to please let him know if there's anything he can do to help. And at first she says thanks, but then she realizes this is probably the man who did this. He then starts to chuckle as he takes off running, pretty much confirming her suspicion.
Why did they ever give any insight on why that she discovered that this is the guy who did this?
Just instinct, I guess. I don't know. They don't really say it, but I do know, on the other side of the coin, that it is kind of common knowledge that a lot of murderers will go and work with the search parties. They will volunteer, all this stuff because they want to be close to the crime.
Yeah, that's absolutely 100% a thing. I just didn't know if there was something maybe I missed that really tipped her off.
No.
Because she seems more so 100% sure when she figures it out, as opposed to, this might be him, this is suspicious, but I'm going to continue to act normal. And she kind of looks at him and she's like, oh my God, like she's figured it out.
I mean, he may have been like smirking when he said it or something. We don't know what he was doing. We then jump back to Carver's basement, where we see Cheryl is tied up and gagged. And Carver offers to remove her gag if she will put on this outfit. She agrees, and we then see her changed into this, it's like a barmaiden outfit. It's basically like a small white dress with like a black corset. And once she gets this on, he hands her a mask. And she puts it on, and it's creepy. It's like this creepy white woman's mask with like fake hair. Honestly, the best description of it is Michael Myers, but female.
It's like a female version of the Hush mask that the killer uses in the Hush, or like a full-faced Phantom of the Opera. It's just creepy.
Yeah. But pretty much from here on out, this is what we will see Cheryl wearing the rest of the movie. Oh, and she goes by slave now, and she must call him master.
Yeah, and this is kind of a little bit important scene here. So this kind of shows her, she's kind of starting to go along with the subservience.
Yeah.
She's becoming more obedient, which is important later on.
So now he has gotten more brutal and more theatrical. He has started stalking and kidnapping women, and he has shortened his length of time between murders. It is now time to head into part 5, a new MO. So we then immediately jump into some news reports about all of these murdered sex workers that have been popping up. And the public have branded Carver the Water Street Butcher. We then start to see Carver pretending to be a cop, even putting lights on his car, busting the prostitutes and, quote, taking them to jail, which is funny because this is exactly what the Hillside Stranglers did in real life. This is how they got their victims. We then cut to Carver's basement, where we see Cheryl crying in her mask, pleading to Master to let her serve him. We then see him bring a girl down there and chain her up. Later on, she escapes her chains and attempts to find a way out, with Cheryl pleading with her to stop. Carver then comes running in wearing a white jumpsuit and gas mask, slamming the girl on the ground and viciously beating her. He then ties her to a support beam and begins screaming at Cheryl. He then unties her, hands her the butcher knife, and whispers something in her ear. Carver then grabs the camera and repositions it facing the other girl, while Cheryl stands frozen for a moment behind her. As Carver then films the girl's reaction, Cheryl comes up behind her and quickly cuts her neck.
I think this is really important, kind of going to what I was just saying. So Cheryl very quickly, like, she doesn't hesitate. She jumps and slits this girl's throat, like, very
She's
very
scared.
quickly.
Yeah.
And it's almost confusing at how she completely didn't put up a fight, but not only that, but how, like, willing and quick she does it, which makes sense later on in the movie. This is definitely, she's in full-on subservient mode.
Well, one of the reasons I had always liked criminology is the psychology aspect of it. It's probably the main reason I've always liked it. And we know that, as human beings, we all have these limits, these walls, these things that we're not going to cross. And he is slowly breaking those for her. And we've seen it with, admitting that she wanted her family dead. We kind of start small and build our way up. And now he has gotten her to kill another human being, basically eliminating that wall. And he is destroying her mentally.
Well, and what's interesting is how she does it, though. She doesn't do it as somebody who, is doing it, but she's so scared. She does it really quick, as if she is looking for that praise, that good job, that she doesn't let him down. And, I'm sure we'll get into this later on in the episode, but there's something called Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah.
And, I think that is starting to compound on as we get to this point of the movie.
Well, we also see when she does cut her throat quick, she immediately drops the knife and kind of puts her hands to her face, like, oh my God, like, what? It's like she wants to please him, but at the same time, she can't believe that she has just basically crossed this line.
She's still in this in between.
Yeah. We then jump over to another pathologist who worked on the bodies of Carver's new sex worker victims. And he says that all of the women were found mutilated, including multiple bite marks, slashes on one side of their faces, and post-mortem sexual assault. There's a lot of people who have conflicting feelings about the death penalty. But with someone like this, man, you almost have to put them to death.
Well,
there's no coming back from this.
It's interesting you bring that up because, the people who argue against the death penalty, there's good reason why this movie kind of later on proves why some people are against it. And I'm a believer in you have to have 100% factual evidence before you put somebody to death for something. But that does come up.
It does, yeah. And it's a really good point. And I can see people being conflicted on it. And it's such a hard call. But man, somebody like this, it's like, this guy could live 3 perfect lives and still wouldn't make up for the shit he's done here.
No, yeah, that's where, like, when you get into religion talk and people being forgiven, there's no way in my mind that somebody like this could ever be rehabilitated or forgiven. There's just, like, once your mind is so fucking broken, you look at somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer, who knew his mind was fucked up. He even tried to fight it for years, but it was the perfect storm of mental illnesses. There is no fixing that. Like, you can't fix something like that.
Yeah.
It's too far gone.
So we then jump back to Mike Mokes, who is teaching this class, and he says that years ago he got the chance to speak to Ted Bundy when he was in jail. And he talks to him about this Water Street Butcher thing. And Ted asked him if the rape was pre or post mortem. And Ted then tells him that if they can find a fresh enough victim, not to announce it, because people like this Water Street Butcher guy, will come back over and over again to have sex with the body, even to the point where there are maggots. Like, they don't care.
It's
And
fucking
that is
awful.
unreal. That is unreal that this would be a thing.
Yeah, that's awful. I just have no other words on
No,
that.
I don't either.
That's fucking awful. I will shout out to these special effects. We don't get a whole lot of special effects as far as the killing and stuff. We do get some, but the special effects makeup team does a awesome job
good
on
job.
these bodies that they're showing.
So, even though this is a good idea, Carver was just too damn good at hiding bodies. They could never find one fresh enough to actually try this plan out. So we then jump to another tape, and it's the middle of the day, and Carver hears someone knock on his door. He goes to answer it, where he finds two young girls selling Girl Scout cookies. He then invites them inside, and at first they say no, but he then tells them that it's okay because he is a cop. So they walk into the living room, where you can tell that one of the girls is very uncomfortable. And they sit down, and Carver starts talking to them, and he asks them where they live. And it turns out one of them lives very close. So while this is going on, the girls suddenly hear a loud commotion and screaming coming from the basement. When they ask about it, he tells them that he has a raccoon trapped down there. He then attempts to get them to go down and look, but despite one of the girls being down to go check this raccoon out, the other girl isn't having it, and she announces that she wants to leave. After Carver discovers one of the girls told her parents what houses she was going to, Carver comes to the conclusion that this would be too risky, and he lets them leave, to which I let out a huge sigh of relief.
Yeah, this is the most anxiety-inducing part of this movie for me. From the time he opens up the door and these little girls are there, I'm like screaming, don't drink the Cokes that he gave them. Like, whatever you do, don't drink the drinks. You can tell one of the girls has this intuition that kicks in and she wants to go. But what really, really creeped me out about this was the language he used. He said, "It sounds like I'm not going to be able to get my cookies today."
He's gross.
As if they were the cookies.
Yeah.
Like they were the cookies that he was ultimately going after.
Because he's a bastard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fucking creepy.
So as he closes the door on the girls, he then walks back into the living room, pulling the sheet off of his table, revealing the table to actually be Cheryl on her hands and knees. Good God, like, this girl, even after all the other abuse, is now being made to pretend to be a fucking coffee table for who knows how long. It just never stops.
Yeah, and she's in almost full Stockholm, like, subservitude, complete obedience, but she still tried to make some noises because she knew that these were little girls. So she's still somewhat there. I think she was part of what was trying to make some of the noises. I know some of it was coming from in the basement. But I don't think she wanted to see these little girls go through this.
So another FBI agent comes on the screen and tells us that there have now been 10 different sex worker murders, and they had almost no evidence until they found a glass with a fingerprint and DNA at one of the victims' apartments. We then jump to a cop named Joe Danvers who worked in the area where all these girls were going missing, and he tells us that the fingerprints and DNA came back with a match. The only problem was it matched to his partner, fellow police officer James Foley. The police then quickly arrest him and begin building their case, where they discover that all of the places Foley had been in the past year, including where he went for vacation, matched where the murder victims were found. They then searched his car and house, where they find jewelry and bloodstains from the 10 victims, essentially sealing Foley's fate. The news then deemed Foley the Water Street Butcher as the state begun to prosecute him seeking the death penalty. Foley's lawyer begged him to take a plea deal in order to avoid being put to death, but he proclaimed his innocence so much that he refused. But unfortunately for James Foley, the jury found him to be guilty of these horrendous murders and sentenced him to death.
Man, this means that this killer has literally been this whole time he's been killing all these people. He has been watching this guy's every move.
Yeah.
Where his vacations are, and he's planning his killings around this because he knows he's going to set this guy up
For years.
for years. And I mean, that's just absolutely mind blowing, the amount of planning.
There's no way he has a job. There's no fucking way he has a fucking job.
No, he definitely does not have a job. This is his job.
Yeah.
This cop, man, he must have picked up a lot of prostitutes. Because they literally said, like, the prostitutes on the stand literally identified him picking up prostitutes in every area where the murders occurred on the nights of the murders.
Yeah.
I'm like, good God. Well, this guy wasn't doing much giving tickets, huh?
No. We then get scenes of Foley's death by lethal injection mixed with shots of tortured women in Carver's basement. And the screen goes black as we are informed that disgraced police officer James Foley was put to death at 12:24 a.m. on September 9th of 2001. That date becomes very important in a moment.
Yeah, so this says he was convicted in 96. So this is why we keep people on death row. And I am completely against people being taxpayers, having people on death row for like 20 or 30 years. But this is why you don't
Do it
execute
immediately.
somebody that quick. And I don't blame them. There's no way, I don't care if I knew I was going to die. There's no way I would sit and admit to these crimes.
Yeah, this is horrendous. Like, I would rather just be dead than everyone think I did this. I mean, they think I did it anyway, but if I just come out and say I did it even though I didn't, I couldn't live with that.
Yeah, there's no doubt once you go down that road of admitting it. Yeah, I would die first.
Plus, I would hope that they would at least continue their options open for finding out maybe if someone else did this. But if you just come out and admit it, they're going to case closed, move on, never look back.
Well, and fuck what the public thinks. His family still stands by him. Like, he still has his kids and his wife who know he couldn't have done some of these things, that probably have serious doubts that it was him. And if you sit up there and say you did it, that means your family, your kids are going to grow up knowing that you admitted to doing these awful things.
And now that Carver has successfully framed and murdered a police officer, we head into part 6, Missed One. So we jump back to Joe Danvers, who, remember, was Foley's partner, and he says that the day Foley was put to death, he found a map that had been placed in his mailbox, circling an area by the bay that said, Missed One. He then gets a call from his supervisor telling him to head to a murder scene that was at the same location. So he gets this map, it circles an area, tells him there's a murder victim there, and literally at the same time, the police find this body. So this is a brand new body. We then see on one of Carver's tapes that he is watching the news coverage of Foley's death while sitting in a restaurant with Cheryl. So she's so scared of him and brainwashed at this point that she won't even run away or signal for help or anything out in public.
Yeah, I think the Stockholm Syndrome is fully kicked in at this point. Like, she doesn't want to run away by this point.
But anyway, back to the body they found. So she was killed and dumped the same way as the other 10 girls. And when they tested the DNA on her body, it came back as James Foley, which is impossible, considering he has been in jail for like 5 years and he's now dead. So the cops realize here that Foley was telling the truth and he was framed by the real killer. This is fucking like evil genius brilliant. Like, serial killer murders cop by getting the justice system that he works for to kill him.
Yeah, that's pretty savage.
That's unreal.
This is like Silence of the Lambs times 100.
Yeah, this is God, man, what a fucking plan. And so much had to go into this to even make this work. I mean, you had to even like find the right cop to fucking frame.
And it gets even better too with what he does here coming up.
Now, this is huge news. Cop put to death is found to be innocent by the same people who convicted him. So they went to put this in the paper, but something way bigger happened that completely overshadowed this. The 9/11 attacks occurred and nobody gave a shit about James Foley's innocence. Which, I remember back to how big 9/11 was, and that makes perfect sense.
I mean, if I was James Foley's son, I would sue everybody. Everybody I possibly could.
Yeah.
Like, I would literally be flipping lawsuits like there was no tomorrow.
Yeah, that's terrible.
This guy is such a mastermind. If they told me in this movie that he plotted 9/11 specifically on this day to make sure that it was covered up, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I do think, though, that he probably was a little bummed that 9/11 knocked out because he, that one guy says this guy spent probably 10 years on this plan. And, and his big reveal to basically show everybody what he pulled off gets overshadowed by 9/11.
He literally went personally to hunt Osama bin Laden after this. You literally rained on my parade.
So we then jump to another one of Carver's tapes where we see that he now has made his car identical to an unmarked police car. He's got like the cage and back and all that shit. And he pulls up to this woman who is broken down on the side of the road. And he asks her if she needs any help. She asks for him to call her a tow truck and he agrees, but he informs her that she needs to be more careful out here because of the Water Street Butcher. He then says, let me drive you down to a gas station where you can safely wait there. So she agrees and she gets in the back of the car. And this scene to me is one of the most haunting and chilling scenes of the movie because this lady does such a great job showing the range of like human emotions that you would go through when you're faced with like a life or death situation like this.
Yeah, it's super unsettling. This is another one we get all in one shot. And the look on her face as she's starting to like piece together. At first she doesn't even believe it and she tries to laugh it off. And then as she realizes what's happening, it's super awful. She even pleads to be raped and that she wouldn't say anything at one point, and that's probably happened.
Yeah.
So many times. And this whole interaction leads to what I think is the most haunting quote of this entire movie.
So she gets in the back and she's all like, "Oh, thank you, officer. I've been standing out here for like an hour." And they start to have like some small talk, but things go south pretty quickly once she realizes that he has passed the exit for the gas station. So she starts to panic a little bit, wondering just where the hell they're going, when he then asks her why she called him officer when she got in the car. And she's confused by this at first and says, like, "I thought that's what, you called police officers." And he says, "Well, yeah, but I'm not a police officer." And this is where we really see the look on her face first change to like a really kind of bone-chilling look. So she sits silent for a moment and then asks him if he's not a cop, then what is he? And he responds, "I'm a butcher." And it is at this point where she realizes she is fucked. And I hate this for her. So she starts pleading for her life, telling him that she has a family and she is so sorry for whatever has made him want to do this. And he stops the car and he tells her that he'll make a deal. If she lets him rape her, he will let her go. And she takes a moment to think about this and then agrees. But unfortunately for her, she's not dealing with someone as simple as this. She just happened to get picked up by the goddamn devil himself. He then says, "Yeah, right, I'm not falling for that." And she starts to cry and ask why they can't do the deal. And he stops for a moment. Then he looks back at her and he delivers the most chilling line of the movie. He says, to be perfectly honest, I don't think either of us are going to want you alive for the things I'm going to do to you. That would be soul crushing to hear when you're like locked in a stranger's car.
Yeah. Yeah, that's horrifying. I think it's one of the as far as quotes and stuff go, I think it's one of the scariest moments of this entire movie.
Yeah.
Like, to put yourself in her situation and to hear that, you pretty much any hope that you have is lost.
Yeah, I mean, it would probably make me want to throw up, to hear somebody say that and to know that I'm in this situation where this person definitely has the upper hand on me.
And they know that this butcher's still out there. They just recently found that out, that the wrong guy was put to death. So she knows kind of through the media the history of the fucking crazy fucked up shit that this guy's done.
Yeah.
So she knows, like, I mean, undoubtedly I'm surprised they didn't have her throw up in this scene.
This next scene is probably the most well-known and referenced scene in the whole movie because it's just creepy as fuck. So we see the woman from the car who is now tied to that support beam in the basement with a piece of clear tape over her mouth. And the camera is like super close to her face to the point where her face takes up the right side of the screen and the left side is like the basement entrance. After a moment, we then start to hear this like weird music play as Carver, who is now dressed in an all-black leotard and a blank-faced mask on his head, begins crawling in the room on all fours like a fucking cat. This is so creepy.
I wouldn't even say a cat, because you don't realize the mask is on his head.
It's on the
at
top of
first.
his head, yeah.
So it looks like this, it's like
Creature?
like I don't know, what do they call them? Like the skinwalker creatures with the long arms and they crawl super weird. And I mean, it just has that vibe to it where it's like, ugh,
Yeah.
what the fuck is that
It's-
coming
it-
behind her?
It's very unnatural looking
Yeah.
for like human movements. So he slowly like slinks his way towards her. And I guess she can kind of see him out of her side eye because as he gets closer, she starts to freak out more and more. Once he finally reaches her, he slowly rises up next to her, revealing that he's also wearing the plague doctor mask. He then moves his hand up the side of her body where we see that he has attached to two of his fingers these like long, thick needles. He kind of then shows them to her, causing her to panic even more, when he then slowly pushes them into the side of her neck. We start to see blood run from the small holes and her mouth, despite the clear tape, and he jams those needles all the way in until they can't go any further. And we essentially get a close-up of her as she dies, which is extremely brutal.
Yeah, definitely one of the most iconic shots of the movie. Him driving these like massive needles into her jugular veins and into her throat. And the blood starts to try to spill out from this tape, but her mouth is taped shut. But because it's clear tape, we can see it. And I thought the actress who did this did a fantastic job at this shot because she's like struggling to make noises through the tape, but she's like gargling at the same time because of this blood trying to come out of her mouth. Really, 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 really haunting scene.
We then see Fulton Lewis, the FBI profiler, begin to explain why it has been so hard to catch Carver. The way he kills, where he kills, and who he kills are all different, causing the profilers to say something different every time, making it seem like this is many different serial killers all going at the same time. And this is done to show us that Edward Carver is very smart when it comes to law enforcement and how the system works. And with that being said, we then move into part 7, Found, which is kind of the part when you first see the movie, you're waiting for. Like, you're waiting for them to get this guy.
This is like if Einstein was like a fucking awful killer. And he put all his time into murdering people instead of the theory of relativity.
Yeah. So we meet up with Joe Danvers, who, remember, his Foley's former partner, who is now determined to catch the guy who essentially killed his partner, goes back to that map that was left in his mailbox. So he realizes that the map was printed from MapQuest, something that us millennials had to use before GPS was so available everywhere.
I did have a chuckle when I heard
Yeah.
MapQuest.
So he then sends this map and info into the FBI, who were able to pinpoint who made the map. And they found out where it was printed from. We then see the FBI SWAT team raid the house that we seen in the beginning. Funny story about the SWAT team. So they only had enough money to rent 4 SWAT costumes. So what they did was they had to film 4 like the same guys running in the front door, then coming in through the side, then coming in through the back door. Like if you watch it, it looks like there's like 20 SWAT guys. It's 4.
Yeah, he even talks about the SWAT guy talks about how they like went in, they literally
They brought
took
it all
the resources they had,
Nope.
all 4 of them,
It's just
over
4.
and over again.
So in the very first shot where you see the SWAT guys, they pull up and they open the door to jump out of the van. And you see the first 4 jump out, and the camera guy follows those 4 to the front door. Those are the same 4 that you see the whole entire time. It's funny because they didn't say like we couldn't afford actors. They couldn't afford the SWAT uniform. That was it.
They probably couldn't afford the actors if they couldn't afford the uniforms. But yeah, I mean that's some of the tricks to low budget independent movie making, and they pulled it off. I wouldn't have known that until you just told me that.
Well, yeah, they were talking about how this movie, it helped them learn so much about editing, which they said they used a lot of those tricks on quarantine. But they had to basically make these shots look like continuous shots, but they had to cut them somewhere because there's only 4 people, only 4 SWAT outfits. So, yeah, it was really, really interesting. So before we find out what the SWAT team finds in the house, we jump back to an interview with FBI field agent Leonard Shway. And he says that every time he is asked how they found Carver, he tells them that they didn't find him. He led them to that house. He wanted them to find it so they could find what he had left for them. So we then jump back to the house. Carver isn't there. There's also very little furniture, and there's not one single fingerprint anywhere in this place. And they find a closet full of boxes housing tons of numbered VHS tapes. And this is how we got the Poughkeepsie tapes. While looking at those, another agent, while checking under a bed, finds a big wooden box. He pulls this box out into the hallway, realizes it's nailed shut, and yells for some help. All the agents gather around as the box is pried open, only to reveal Cheryl Dempsey, dressed in her outfit and white mask, laying silently. Another agent then checks her pulse and immediately screams for a medic because she is still alive. We then see Cheryl placed on a gurney and rushed outside to an ambulance. In total, she had spent 8 years as Carver's sex slave in his basement. This is scary because this shit really fucking happens.
Yeah. It's happened. It's unfortunately it's happening to somebody right now somewhere in the world, probably in the United States. Yeah, it's fucking horrifying. And the goddamn EMS didn't even have the wherewithal to take the mask off of her. Like they're loading her up on the gurney with the mask still on. I'm like, why would that not be the first thing you did?
Yeah, it's sad that this is a real thing that happens. There was a woman named Colleen Stan, and she was kept captive by a couple named Cameron and Janice Hooker. And he had kidnapped her, really similar to the last lady we seen, where her car or something had broke down, and they had said they were going to give her a ride. And they kept her in a box for 7 years. And they only brought her out. Well, at first, he only brought her out for like sex stuff. But years later down the road, he ends up keeping her in a box under his bed for a long time. And then he would let her out like here or there to help take care of his kids and help his wife like cook and clean, and then put her back in the box. And there was even at one point where he would let her like go jogging by herself. He even took her to visit her fucking family one time, and she didn't say anything. And finally, one day, I believe the wife, Janice, wanted to leave the husband. So she went and got Colleen and was like, let's leave together. And this is how, Cameron Hooker gets caught. There was also, I just found a case like a week ago about two guys who built a doomsday bunker for the end of the world. So yeah, there's these two guys who, thought the end of the world was coming. They built this doomsday bunker, but they also put a fucking jail cell in it, and they would kidnap women and keep them in there for doing this exact thing. Yeah, man, it really happens. You would think it doesn't happen, or it's maybe happened once or twice, but no. Like, I just gave you, just off my head, two cases that this exact thing happens. You go look them up and look at the details if you want, but
I remember in the 90s, I believe it was from the 90s, could have been the late 80s, there was a case of a girl who I think was kept pretty much captive. I don't remember the details if it was her parents that did it. I think it was, but she was pretty much kept captive for her whole life up until this point. And the documentary it was on YouTube, but it's like psychologists talking to her and trying to learn as much as they can from this happening to her. And the way she acts is very similar to what we're about to see.
yeah.
And I think the actress that plays Cheryl did an amazing job.
Yeah, the real girl, Colleen Stan, she actually, once she got away and everything and tried to restart her life, it didn't go great. Like, this obviously affected her whole entire life. There is a movie about this. It's called Girl in the Box, and I've seen it on Tubi before. So if you're interested, you can go check that out. That's a true story. So we then see Dr. Arnold Montsafar, who was the treating physician for Cheryl. And he says that he had never seen a human being born and raised in the United States show evidence of this kind of torture. She had burns, deep cuts, 5 teeth that had been removed by pliers or a hammer, many different broken bones that were never allowed to heal, extremely malnourished to the point where her organs were damaged. There was also evidence of severe sexual torture, including electrocution of the genitals and many more things that the doctor claims are too horrible to say out loud.
Yeah, the cuts look absolutely vicious. So shout out to the special effects team who did that. Apparently her bones would be broken, and then he would use
Like a tightening thing.
Yeah, to just to make sure that it wasn't able to heal back, which is just fucking insane. Ripped out teeth. I put her privates mutilated. I'm like, holy shit, YouTube is going to fucking absolutely hate us for this.
We also find out that while she was in the hospital, a lot of her injuries got worse instead of better. At first, the doctors couldn't figure it out, but they eventually discovered that Cheryl had been re-injuring herself when no one was present. And her psychiatrist says that the reason for this is because brutal pain had been such a big part of her life for so long, she no longer knew how to exist without it, which is so fucking sad. We then see on the screen that after months of lobbying, they finally got the Dempseys to agree to an interview with Cheryl. So we then see a much healthier looking Cheryl sitting on a couch dressed very prim and proper. But unfortunately, you can very much tell how broken she is, especially when she begins to speak. She almost speaks in a whisper the whole time, and she continuously says that she doesn't know what they want her to say. They try to ask her some questions, but she just responds with, what do you want me to say? She then tries to back out of the interview looking very worried as she looks off to the side. She then goes to scratch her head with her left arm, and this is where we see that her fucking hand had been cut off at some point, which you're not expecting this. This is a very jarring scene here. I mean, we know what all she's been through, but we we didn't know that he cut her fucking hand off.
Yeah, we also don't know at this point the Stockholm syndrome, that as how bad it is for her. So it's really a shock when she mentions that he loved me and he's gonna come back. But when she goes to itch her head in the middle of saying this, it's like, holy shit. And you almost feel bad. And like I said, the way she's speaking is very close to how people who have been through this, kind of how they act when they first get out of it. And so they did a great job with that. But yeah, the hand missing thing, it's like, holy shit, man. He's ripped her teeth out, cut body parts off. This girl's just been through, like, at this point, I don't know if you can be fixed.
So the interviewer then tells her that she can say anything she wants, and she kind of freezes up a little. She kind of looks like a deer in headlights when suddenly she blurts out that he loved her. She then says, after looking off to the side again, that nobody ever lets her say that, but it's true, and he didn't mean to leave her behind. And she also says that someday he's going to come back for her and take her away. So after she says this, we see the first genuine positive reaction from her as the screen freezes on her smile with tears coming out of her eyes. Text then appears at the bottom of the screen that says 2 weeks after this interview, Cheryl Dempsey took her own life. And this is why we see her funeral at the beginning of the film. So a couple things. One, how they did the hand thing was that's actually a green screen behind her, and they put a green glove on her hand. And then the director, who has no special effects experience at all, actually went in like scene by scene and makes sure that he kind of cleaned it up. And they actually ended up sending this to later on, they sent it to a company that does, CGI. And the CGI people said, well, honestly, there's really nothing else that we could do. Like, it's kind of fine the way it is. Another thing was Stacy Chbosky talked about this scene. And she says that a couple things is, one, the whisper thing actually came from, there was a little girl that she used to babysit, and it was like a friend of hers daughter, and they had kind of moved apart, and they visited each other or something 2 years later. And she said that this girl, like, she went up to talk to this girl who she used to babysit every day, and this girl, because she hadn't seen her in so long, she was this really shy kind of, this is how she talked and this is how she acted. So this is really where Stacy gets this from. She actually kind of takes this from a real life thing of a little girl feeling very insecure and kind of worried and unsure about her surroundings and the people around her. So that's how she kind of came up with that. And then she talks about how, like, she had her hair done in this French braid. And obviously we see she only has one hand, so we know that she did not do this braid. And this, coupled with the fact that you see her keep looking off to the side, she did all this stuff to make it like, on the surface, it looks like she's now reunited with her family and everything's good again. But really, there's tension between her and her mother. And obviously her mother dressed her this way, did her hair this way, because she is trying to maintain that facade to the public that everything's okay now. And then this is why she looks off really worried to the side when she starts talking about Carver loving her still, because her mom obviously fucking loses it.
Which just makes sense of why they said it took months of going back and forth with the family to even get this interview. Because her mom clearly didn't want her to go into this interview and say these things that they were probably already fighting about. I think it's so creepy when you realize that her body being found alive in the house was all part of the plan. Like, he waited until she was so mentally rewired that she would never betray him or reveal anything that would hurt him. Like, she was full on gone by this point, to the point where he was able to leave her alive as part of his ultimate plan, knowing that
She wouldn't
She
leave.
wouldn't turn on him. She probably wouldn't be able to go on without him. It's rather her taking her own life was part of the plan, or if he was going to go back and get her at some point. The fact that she was purposely left there as like the police are like, finally, we got this girl, we recovered her, she's alive. But then it's all for nothing because she wants to be with him anyway. It's just so fucking like, just such a mind fuck.
Yeah, I think this scene is very powerful and is very important to the movie. It's kind of, you don't expect Cheryl Dempsey to come out alive out of this. You fully expect him to eventually kill her at some point. And when we find out she is alive, you're like amazed. And then you find out that we're going to get to hear from her and you're even more surprised. And then this is what we get. And I really think that Stacy Chbosky did a fantastic job. I mean, she didn't really have to add all this stuff, but it becomes extremely important to the movie and the story.
Yeah, I think, I know you mentioned it was her idea to add this character in there. I think this would be a much different movie without it. Not nearly as structured of a movie, because this is the pinnacle of the story.
Yeah.
It's getting to this point and realizing her family finally has her back, but they don't, because her mind has been literally rewired to where they'll never get that person back. That person doesn't exist anymore.
No, that person died.
The most horrifying part of it all.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is, what happens when people's brains get fucked up from this much trauma. I could totally see how you could come to the same conclusion she did. 100%. I don't know how you come back from something like this. And, I could debate whether it's even possible to come back from something like this. In this case, this specific case, I don't think it is. I don't think she would ever be normal. So after we get this super depressing news dropped on us, we also see that in the note that she left behind, she declared her undying love for her master. We then jump to a news report that shows us that Carver did come back for her. He literally dug her grave up and pulled her dead body from her casket and took him with her to do only God knows what. Her poor parents, man. I mean, there's never an end, apparently.
Yeah.
And he even leaves the fucking tape of him stealing her. This is how we see the tape, because he leaves it there. He wants them to know that their daughter will never be their daughter anymore. This is his property.
Yeah, not only did he steal her mentally, but now he has her even in death physically. I could see her being so fucked up that when she first got back with her parents, she probably didn't even think that they were real. She probably fought with them like, he killed you years ago. Y'all are just fucking with me. Like, y'all aren't real. You're not my real parents. They were killed. The brain can't handle trauma for 8 years straight without there being a complete rewiring.
So we then cut to our last interview with FBI agent Leonard Shui, where he tells us that they still haven't caught or identified the serial killer known as the Water Street Butcher, aka Edward Carver, and he strongly doubts that he has stopped killing. He assumes that he has just moved somewhere else where the murder rate is slowly increasing and local law enforcement have no idea it's him. But he does know one thing for sure. If this documentary ever makes it to theaters, Carver won't be able to help himself and will go watch it as many times as he can. And because of that, the FBI will be watching. We then jump to FBI audio-visual specialist Simon Alray, and he says that because the tapes were all numbered, he found that there were 27 tapes still missing. And they have no fucking clue what could be on them. They may even hold the truth to his real identity. We may never know. We then see that old footage of young teenage Cheryl Dempsey as she dances for the camera. The screen freezes on her smiling face as we see the words "for Cheryl Dempsey" appear on the screen. And thankfully, that is the end of the Poughkeepsie Tapes. This one took a lot out of me when I wrote it.
What do you think's on the missing 27 tapes?
I honestly don't know. I would say it's somewhere between his identity and maybe something that he didn't want to let go. Like something just him and he killed somebody or something with Cheryl Dempsey that's just too personal that he didn't want to give up.
I think it was a setup for a possible sequel. I think that they snuck that in there with the off chance that there may be a sequel. If I was law enforcement, I would probably think either identity or some of those tapes probably just fucked up. Like out of thousands of tapes, you're gonna have tapes that fuck up. The tape's
Yeah,
gonna
maybe.
pop. We anybody who ever dealt with VHS knows that shit tapes don't last forever. And if you record thousands of tapes and you only have 27 mess up, you're doing pretty good.
So, I did see a fairly recent interview with the brothers who did this, and they talked about with the success that the film has had, some companies had offered them to, completely redo the movie, but have more money, do like a sequel, anything like that. And they actually said that they don't have any plans to ever do anything else with this. They said that essentially what happened was when they did this movie, they were young and they were really trying to make a mark. They were going extreme to really make an extreme movie. And they said now that they're older, like if they were to go back and make a sequel or redo this movie, that it would be so much more tamed down because they have kids and they have wives and family now, and they don't have it in themselves to do a movie like this again.
Yeah, I don't think that they should ever completely remake it. There's nothing I feel like they could have done in this movie that they could have done better to convey the movie that they were trying to make. Like, they couldn't have went back and done things more brutal without it being overdone. Yeah, I don't see any need. Like, their lack of money and lack of resources did not hurt the movie that they were trying to make.
No. Yeah, so I don't have any facts. I literally gave you guys everything that I could find on this. The couple facts I did find were stuff I've already talked about. So, ratings and kill count, I don't have a total kill count. This one's hard to find. So the FBI claims that Carver killed over 3,000 victims, estimated. The kill count in the movie they're so all over the place, and they don't have names. They don't have where they were killed, how they were killed, or who they were even killed by. They're just unnamed. I counted at least 38, and obviously we don't know their names, so I can't give you their names, but we have stuff like some were bludgeoned, bisected, decapitated, burned, decapitated with a circular saw, decapitated with a handsaw, castrated, skull crushed, suffocated with a bag, stabbed with a butcher knife, stabbed in the neck with needles, hit in the head with a pipe, suicide, and lethal injection. We have a lot of fucking killing in this.
Yeah, just if the rest of the episode was absolutely fine, just that right there, you just killed it for you.
Yeah, we probably hit on a lot of those keywords. So favorite kill.
So I went with the iconic scene where she's tied up to the column and he creeps in there all like super creepy and sticks those needles through her throat.
Mm-hmm.
The whole like blood trying to get out of the clear tape and the way the actress played that and was trying to make noises. And it's the most iconic scene in the movie, I think. So that was my one. My second would be the prostitute Cheryl kills by slitting her throat. I think that's a really important moment in the movie to show Cheryl's kind of transitioning as her mind is being broken.
I went with James Foley as my favorite because it's mind-blowing. It's such an amazing plan. It's unreal, that to have him killed by lethal injection after spending like 10 years setting this up is phenomenal. My second favorite was the lady with the needles in the neck.
Good scene, man.
Yeah.
Iconic.
Yeah. So rating.
Rating, I went with a 4.0 out of 5. Great acting, especially from the actress who played Cheryl, who wasn't even an actress at the time. The Sherry Moon who can act, I should say.
I believe she's actually a writer.
Well,
Yeah.
she is, if not, she acts like a writer really good because she can act. I think the movie's success relied on her doing that part. The imagery and the found footage shots was fantastic. Overall feel extremely unnerving. Thought the pacing was great. Like there's never like a boring part in this. It's just constant, 100% the whole time.
Yeah, it's pedal to the metal the whole way.
Yeah, the torture scenes were done really realistic, even down to like the BDSM rope ties and the whole master slave aspect. Practical effects, we didn't get a whole lot, but what we did get was great. And I thought the practical effect makeup team did a great job on the dead bodies that we get in the movie.
Yeah.
The true horror of this movie lies, like we've already talked about, in its real world ties. The fact that this shit really fucking happens is absolutely horrifying, especially with the little girl in the beginning showing how easy, even when a kid does everything the right way, how easy and quick that can happen. It's really scary. I do wish that the camera footage that was found would have been a little bit more clean. I like parts of it. I don't know how much. I know you said they shot it on a real handheld camera. I don't know how much of that was kind of dirtied up a little bit, because I don't remember cameras in the 90s, like all the footage of us as like babies and kids, I thought looked a little better than this.
It does, but as the tape gets older and degrades, it starts to get. I think that's really a lot of what we were seeing was the tape itself not being in good condition.
And I would imagine they went in and did that to show the aging over time. Oh, I do wish that, kind of like the Blair Witch did, with as they edited less and less of the documentary ended up in the movie and more of the footage. Wish we would have got a little bit more footage, but I know this movie also had to have those documentary parts to kind of explain the story in the way it did. All in all, I think it's a great found footage mockumentary that's super unnerving.
Yeah. I gave it a 4.2. I love and hate this movie. It's done fantastically. As somebody who really loves those kind of documentaries and seen many of them, I totally would believe it being a legit documentary, except for probably the parts where we actually see people die. They don't ever put that in there, but it's just really good. And like I said, man, I think it hits harder for people that are into kind of crime or have a job doing that or some kind of education, just your general interest. When you really know about kind of the dirty things that goes on in crime, this movie kind of affects you more. Especially if you've ever, researched something really deeply and you've gotten to the point where you've learned a lot about a real victim. Now you have an actual person and a face to put this to.
I think it's the psychology behind it too.
Yeah.
If you've looked into the psychology of victims who've been in similar circumstances, they did a really good job with that. And it's horrifying that somebody's brain can literally be rewired and just their old self dumped.
Yeah, I've been through many of these, and I can confidently say none of them are ever happy ever after. After they come out of this, there's never a happy ever after for these people. Some may be better than others, but it's never the same, unfortunately. Yeah, but I gave it a 4.2, man, for something to kind of hit me that hard. And it was kind of difficult to write, man, because like I said, it's just nonstop, constantly. You're constantly writing and trying to figure out, how to put this in a word of good storytelling. But you're writing about really horrific things. It was a challenge.
Well, yeah, I see completely why this comes up in people's top 10 list of actual movies that scared them so often, and its connection to the real world. I think it's really telling that we as horror fans, a lot of us, I think both of us included, we root for the bad guy a lot of times. Like, and Friday the 13th. And
Yeah, when they're fun.
yeah, when it's fun. We can watch Terrifier and see way worse shit done and actually see it and be super excited about it. But when you get this, it's such a different feeling because it's so real.
Well, I think that goes really good with that debate that non-horror fans try to say is like horror movie fans, the movies can make them violent. And that's not true because if you look at, us as a whole, we love, the fun stuff. But when it comes to real stuff, we don't take pleasure in watching something like that. Like most horror fans I know would totally stop to help somebody in a bad situation like this and not cheer on the guy who's, fucking hanging somebody upside down or stabbing them in the fucking neck, like that's what I've experienced with all the horror fans I've met.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a difference in praising a movie like this for as realistic as they were able to make it and actually praising the actions. And I think those two things get mixed up with people who are anti-horror and make that argument. There's always an underlying reason that they're pushing those. A lot of times there's religion and things. They just don't like horror. But yeah, there's a big difference. I praise this movie for its ability to show this situation so realistically, but it still be a movie. I would never praise these things happening in real life.
Well, that is our opinion on the Poughkeepsie Tapes. Tell us what you guys thought about the Poughkeepsie Tapes. I don't really know if there's like a group of people that hate it. I know it's got a fan base, but I haven't really heard anybody talk about a lot of shit about it. So let us know what you guys think. Once again, we thank you guys for listening. Please give us a follow or like if you enjoy the show. Check out the website, check out the socials, tell a friend, a family member, or your local serial killer about the show. We hope to see you next time. You got any last words?
Like and comment on YouTube because we will be getting it without lube this week.
Yeah, we will.